Doctor had spent 15 years digging through frozen ground in Siberia. She studied ice cores and ancient soil samples. It was lonely work in a place where temperatures dropped so low that exposed skin could freeze in minutes, but loved it. The ice held secrets from thousands of years ago, and she was patient enough to find them. On a Tuesday morning in late November, everything changed. Her assistant, a young man named, came running into her small research station. His face was white, and not just from the cold. He was holding a printout from their ground-penetrating radar equipment, and his hands were shaking so badly that the paper rattled like leaves in wind. "Doctor," he said, struggling to catch his breath, "you need to see this. 2 kilometers down, there's something there, something that shouldn't exist." Took the printout and studied it. At first she thought the machine had broken. The image showed a perfect circle exactly 20 meters across. The edges were too clean, too precise. Nature did not make shapes like this. Nature was messy and random. This was something else entirely. "How old is the ice layer at that depth?" she asked, already knowing the answer would trouble her. Swallowed hard. "At least 40,000 years, maybe older." Sat down slowly. 40,000 years ago, humans were still living in caves and hunting with stone tools. They were not building perfect geometric structures deep underground. Whatever was down there, it was not made by human hands. Within 2 weeks, the small research station became the busiest place on Earth. Governments sent their best scientists. Military planes landed on makeshift runways carved into the ice. Russian soldiers stood guard alongside American Marines, Chinese engineers, and European researchers. For the first time in history, the world's powers worked together without arguing about borders or politics. They all wanted to know the same thing: what was buried beneath the Siberian permafrost. The digging took 3 months. They used heated drills and careful excavation techniques, oversaw every step, refusing to let anyone rush the process. Whatever was down there had waited 40,000 years. It could wait a little longer. When they finally broke through into the chamber below, was the first to climb down the ladder. She stepped off the last rung and turned around, and what she saw made her forget how to breathe. The chamber was massive, carved from solid rock with walls as smooth as glass. In the center stood a ring of black stone, exactly as the radar had shown. But the printout had not captured the most disturbing detail. The ring was covered in symbols that moved. They shifted and rearranged themselves constantly, like living things. When tried to look directly at them, they seemed to slide away from her vision. When she looked from the corner of her eye, they almost made sense. Dr. James arrived 2 days later. He was a linguist from MIT, famous for cracking ancient codes that others had given up on. He took one look at the shifting symbols and declared that he would solve them within a week. He was wrong. The symbols did not follow any pattern he had ever seen. They were not letters or pictures or mathematical formulas. They were something completely new. James became obsessed. He stopped eating regular meals. He stopped sleeping more than a few hours at a time. His colleagues worried about him, but James waved away their concerns. He was close to something, he said. He could feel it. On the 14th night, James walked into the chamber alone. The guards had stepped away for a shift change, and no one saw him enter. He stood before the great ring of black stone and raised his hand. Later, he would say that he did not choose to do this. His arm moved on its own, pulled by something he could not see or understand. His palm touched the cold surface of the ring. The world exploded into light. Was in her quarters when it happened. The ground shook so violently that she was thrown from her bed. Alarms screamed. People shouted. She grabbed her coat and ran toward the chamber, pushing through crowds of panicked researchers. When she reached the entrance, she stopped and stared. The black ring was alive. Its center had filled with something that looked like liquid starlight, swirling and pulsing with colors that had no words for. They were not colors from any rainbow she had ever seen. They hurt her eyes in a strange way, as if her brain was not built to process what it was seeing. and through this impossible window, she could see another world. Crystal towers rose toward a sky lit by three suns. The buildings looked grown rather than built, their surfaces shimmering with inner light. It was beautiful beyond description, a city from dreams and fairy tales. Felt tears running down her face, though she was not sure if she was crying from wonder or from fear. Then she heard the screaming. It came from the other side of the gate, distant at first but growing closer. It was not a human scream. The sound had too many layers, too many frequencies. It was the sound of alarm, of warning, of something terribly wrong. Shapes began to appear in the swirling light. They were tall and angular, like origami figures folded from pearl and shadow. They moved with a grace that made think of dancers or predators. Their bodies had no clear front or back, and their heads, if they were heads, were covered in faceted surfaces that reflected the impossible colors around them. The first one stepped through the gate and into the chamber. It was 12 feet tall. It wore no clothing, carried no visible weapons, and yet every person in the chamber felt the same thing, a deep, primal urge to run. This being was not hostile, not exactly, but it was dangerous in a way that went beyond simple violence. Looking at it felt like looking at a thunderstorm or a wildfire. It was a force of nature wearing a shape. The being's many-faceted eyes swept across the gathered humans. When it spoke, the words did not come through ears. They appeared directly in her mind, cold and clear as ice water. The seed species here, impossible. More beings poured through the gate behind the first one. Dozens of them, each slightly different but all sharing that same terrifying grace. They spread through the chamber like shoppers in a store, examining the humans with obvious disappointment. You were, another voice said in its mind. You were deemed insufficient. Did not know what those words meant. But she understood, with a certainty that made her stomach turn to ice, that humanity had just failed a test it did not know it was taking. And the beings who had given that test were not happy with the results. The beings moved through the chamber like ghosts, their angular bodies casting strange shadows in the light from the gate. Counted at least 30 of them now, maybe more. They examined equipment, touched walls, and studied the humans with expressions that might have been curiosity or might have been disgust. It was impossible to tell. Their mental voices overlapped in his head, a chorus of cold observations. Primitive neural architecture. No psionic resonance whatsoever. Barely post-atomic technology. How did they activate the threshold? They should not possess the cognitive capacity. Wanted to speak, to defend her species, but her mouth would not move. The presence of these beings pressed down on her mind like a heavy weight. She could barely think, let alone form words. Then one of them approached her directly. It was taller than the others, its body a deeper shade of pearl that seemed to glow from within. When it looked at her, felt something push into her thoughts. It was not painful exactly, but it was deeply wrong, like fingers rummaging through a drawer that contained her most private memories. The being froze. It pulled back so quickly that it stumbled, which seemed to surprise the other beings greatly. They turned to look, their faceted eyes all focusing on at once. "What is it?" one of them asked. "What did you find?" The tall being did not answer immediately. It was staring at with something that looked almost like fear. When it finally spoke, its mental voice was different from before. Quieter, more uncertain. This one remembers, they have persistence, they have imagination. All species dream, another being said dismissively. No, the tall being shook its head, a gesture that seemed borrowed from human body language. You do not understand. They do not just dream. They create fiction. They simulate scenarios that do not exist. They prepare for futures they cannot predict. The other beings went very still. Explain, one of them demanded. The tall being gestured toward with one of its folded limbs. I searched her memories. She spends hours each day imagining things that have never happened, conversations she might have, problems she might face, dangers that may never come. She worries constantly about the future. It paused. They call this planning, strategy. They have built their entire civilization on imagining what does not yet exist. A murmur ran through the gathered beings. Did not need to understand their words to know they were disturbed. Impossible, one said. That would require enormous cognitive resources. No biological brain could sustain that level of continuous simulation. And yet they do, the tall being replied. All of them from childhood until death. They never stop imagining. The beings looked at each other, their bodies flickering with colors that could not name. They were communicating in some way she could not access, having a conversation that happened too fast for her human mind to follow. Finally, the tall being turned to face the gate. Seal the threshold, it commanded. Seal it now. The conclave must be informed immediately. On what grounds? Another being asked. The seed species was not insufficient. The tall being's mental voice carried a weight that made his head throb. They were quarantined, deliberately isolated from the rest of the seeded worlds, and now I understand why. Why? The tall being looked at one more time. In its faceted eyes, she saw something she never expected to see from such an alien creature, genuine fear. Because they weaponize imagination, they dream of destruction, they prepare for wars that have not started, they invent enemies that do not exist, and then they create weapons to defeat those enemies. It moved toward the gate. They are not a failed experiment, they are a dangerous one. The founders knew this. That is why they locked them away. The beings moved quickly after that. They flowed back through the gate like water draining from a tub, their angular bodies folding in ways that hurts eyes. The last one through was the tall being, and it paused at the threshold to look back at the humans one final time. We will return, it said, the words appearing in every human mind at once. The conclave will decide your fate. Until then, know this. You were never meant to reach the stars. You were never meant to find this gate. Everything you have built, everything you have achieved, is a mistake that will soon be corrected. The gate snapped shut. The swirling light vanished, leaving only the black stone ring and a chamber full of shocked, silent humans. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The word quarantined hung in the air like poison gas. James was sitting on the floor near the gate, his face pale and his eyes wide. He had been the closest to the beings when they spoke, and something in him had broken. He was muttering to himself, the same words over and over. They planted us like seeds, and now they want to pull us up like weeds. Walked to him slowly and knelt beside him. She put her hand on his shoulder, and he flinched as if her touch burned. James, she said quietly, what did you see? When you touched the gate, what happened? He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much. I saw all of it. Millions of worlds, millions of species, all planted by the same hands. They watch them grow. They guide their evolution. And when they grow wrong, when they develop in ways that were not planned. He trailed off, unable to finish. What happens? Pressed. They harvest them, they wipe the slate clean and start over. James laughed, but it was not a happy sound. We were supposed to develop telepathy. We were supposed to evolve beyond physical bodies. Instead, we built machines. We split atoms. We imagined futures and then built tools to make them real. He grabbed his arm with sudden strength. Don't you see, we grew wrong, and now they know we're still here. Stood up slowly. Around her, the other researchers were beginning to recover from their shock. Voices rose in confusion and fear. Someone was crying. Someone else was praying. But was not afraid. She was angry. They had called humanity a mistake. They had called human imagination a weapon. They had looked at everything her species had built, the art, the science, the dreams made real through hard work and determination, and they had seen only a problem to be corrected. Had spent her whole life uncovering secrets buried in the ice. She had never backed down from a mystery, never given up on a puzzle others had abandoned. and she was not about to start now. She looked at the silent gate, the black ring that connected to a universe full of beings who thought humanity was an error, and she made a promise to herself, standing there in the cold chamber deep beneath the Siberian ice. If they wanted to correct humanity's mistake, they would have to work for it. Because had spent her entire life imagining worst-case scenarios and planning for disasters that might never come. It was time to put all that worrying to good use. The video leaked 3 days after the gate closed. Someone had recorded everything on their phone, hiding it in their pocket while the beings examined humanity like specimens in a jar. Within hours, every news station on Earth was playing the footage. Within days, the world had changed forever. Watched the chaos unfold from her small quarters at the research station. Protests filled the streets of every major city. Some people demanded answers from their governments. Others prayed in churches and temples and mosques. A few insisted the whole thing was a hoax, a trick created by special effects artists. But most people understood the truth. Humanity was not alone in the universe, and the universe did not seem happy to see them. The panic lasted about 2 weeks, then something remarkable happened. World leaders began talking to each other. Not arguing, not threatening, not posturing for political advantage. Actually talking. The American president called the Russian president directly, without translators or diplomats in between. The European Union held emergency meetings that included countries they had not spoken to in years. China opened its borders to international scientists for the first time in decades. Fear, it turned out, was an excellent motivator for cooperation. The Siberian site became the most protected location on Earth. Soldiers from 12 nations stood guard around the perimeter. The best engineers built new facilities that could withstand earthquakes, bombs, and weather that would freeze ordinary buildings solid. And in the center of it all, the black gate waited in silence, its symbols still shifting across its surface like restless animals. James recovered slowly from his mental contact with the beings. He spent weeks in a medical facility, doctors monitoring his brain activity while he slept. When he finally emerged, he was different, quieter, more focused, and he carried knowledge that no one else possessed. "The symbols are not a language," he told during one of their long conversations. "They are a lock, a very complicated lock that responds to pattern recognition." "Pattern recognition," repeated. James nodded. "The beings who built this gate, they think in straight lines. Logic, mathematics. They see a problem, they calculate the solution. Simple." He tapped his temple. "But humans, we see patterns everywhere. Faces in clouds, shapes in random noise. Our brains are constantly looking for meaning, even where none exists. And that helps us with the gate. How? Because the lock was designed to keep out logical minds, minds that would try to solve it step by step." James smiled, and for a moment he looked like his old self again. "But a human mind does not work that way. We make leaps, we guess, we imagine the answer before we prove it." It took James 3 more months to crack the lock. He worked with a team of mathematicians, artists, and even a few children who had been selected for their ability to see patterns that adults missed. Together, they mapped the shifting symbols and found the underlying structure that controlled them. On a cold morning in March, James stood before the gate at his side. Behind them, cameras broadcast to every screen on Earth. Billions of people watched as James raised his hand and touched the black stone. The symbols stopped moving. They arranged themselves into a configuration that James had predicted, a pattern that looked like a flower made of geometry. The center of the gate filled with swirling light once again. This time, humanity was ready. Soldiers in specially designed armor stood in formation, carrying weapons that had been built using principles discovered in the gate's structure. Scientists recorded everything with instruments that could detect energies no human had ever measured before, and stood at the front, wearing a simple coat and carrying nothing but her determination. She stepped through the gate. The other side was not the crystal city she had glimpsed before. It was a graveyard. Stood on a platform of white stone, looking out over a landscape of destruction. The beautiful towers she remembered were shattered, their crystal walls broken and scattered across streets that had not seen movement in centuries. Bodies lay everywhere, preserved perfectly by some technology could not understand. They belonged to 100 different species, some humanoid, some completely alien. All of them were dead. She walked slowly through the silent streets, her boots crunching on crystal fragments. The beings who had visited Earth had seemed so powerful, so advanced. But something had destroyed this place utterly. Something had killed everyone who lived here and left their bodies as a warning. Found the answer carved into a wall near the center of the city. The symbols were different from those on the gate. These were larger, cruder, obviously made in haste by hands that were trembling with fear, but had spent months studying the gate's language, and she could read enough to understand the message. The HFY Stories return. She photographed everything. The bodies, the destruction, the warning carved into stone. Then she walked back to the gate and stepped through to Earth, where James and the others waited with worried faces. "Well," James asked, "what did you find?" Was silent for a long moment. She thought about the dead city. She thought about the beings who had called humanity a mistake. She thought about the word harvest and what it might mean for a species that grew wrong. "We are not the only ones they planted," she finally said. "And we are not the only ones they decided to correct." She held up her camera. "But we might be the only ones who saw it coming." The images from the dead city spread across the world within hours. People saw the bodies of species they would never meet, the ruins of civilizations they would never know. They saw the warning carved in stone, and they understood what it meant. The beings who had visited Earth were not the real threat. They were gardeners, caretakers, watching over the seeds they had planted. But behind them, somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, something else waited. Something that came when the garden grew wrong. Something called the harvesters. Humanity had imagined monsters under the bed since the first humans sat around the first fires. They had told stories of demons and dragons and things that hunted in the night. They had evolved to fear predators, to prepare for dangers they could not see. Now they knew the predators were real, and for the first time, they knew exactly what they were preparing for. Stood before the United Nations 1 month later, addressing every leader on Earth through a screen the size of a building. She showed them the images from the dead city. She explained what the beings had said, what the warning meant, what was coming if they did not prepare. "They think we are a mistake," she said, her voice carrying to billions of ears. "They think our imagination, our creativity, our ability to dream of futures and build them into reality is an error, something to be corrected." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I say they are wrong. I say our imagination is our greatest strength, and I say we use it to prepare for what is coming." The vote was unanimous. For the first time in human history, every nation on Earth agreed on something. They would not wait for the harvesters to come to them. They would go out to meet them, and they would show the universe what a species of dreamers could do when they had something worth fighting for. The conclave fleet arrived without warning on a Tuesday afternoon. Was in her office at the Siberian facility, reviewing reports from the exploration teams that had been traveling through the gate. They had found 12 more dead worlds so far, each one a graveyard of species who had grown wrong, each one carrying the same warning about the harvesters. She was tired and worried and starting to wonder if humanity had any chance at all. Then the sky changed. It started with a shimmer, like heat rising from hot pavement. Then cracks appeared in the blue, spreading outward like a frozen lake breaking apart in spring. And through those cracks came ships. Thousands of them. They emerged from folded space in perfect formation, blocking out the sun with their impossible geometry. Ran outside and looked up at the sky filled with alien vessels. Around her, soldiers raised weapons that suddenly seemed very small. Scientists activated recording equipment with trembling hands. Ordinary workers dropped their tools and stared in silent terror. The ships did not attack. They simply waited, hanging in the sky like a judgment. Then a voice appeared in its mind. In everyone's mind. Every human on Earth heard the same words at the same moment, spoken by something that called itself the first speaker. People of the seed world designated Earth. Your existence has been reviewed by the conclave. You have developed in ways that violate the design parameters established by the founders. Your technology, your weapons, your thinking machines, all of these represent deviations from the intended evolutionary path. Felt the voice pressing against her thoughts, cold and vast and utterly certain of its own authority. You have one cycle, approximately 30 of your days, to surrender your weapons, dismantle your machines, and prepare your world for correction. A new seed will be planted. Your descendants will have the opportunity to evolve properly, to develop the psionic potential that was always intended. This is not punishment. This is correction. This is mercy. The voice paused and felt something like curiosity brush against her mind. Do you understand these terms? Walked to the communication center, where technicians were frantically trying to establish contact with the fleet. She pushed through the crowd and sat down at a console that could broadcast on every frequency humanity had ever discovered. "Let me talk to them," she said. The technicians looked at each other nervously. Was not a politician or a general. She was just a scientist who had been in the right place at the wrong time, but she had been there from the beginning. She had seen the dead worlds. She understood what they were facing better than anyone else on Earth. "Do it," one of the technicians said. Took a deep breath and spoke into the microphone. Her words went out to every radio, every television, every phone on Earth. They also went up to the fleet hanging in the sky, translated by equipment salvaged from the dead worlds. "This is Doctor, speaking on behalf of humanity. I have one answer to your terms." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "No." The first speaker responded immediately, its mental voice carrying confusion and something that might have been amusement. "You would choose extinction. Your species would rather die than accept correction." "We would rather remain ourselves," replied. "We have seen what correction means. We have walked through your graveyards. We have counted the bodies of species who trusted you, who believed your promises of mercy." Her voice grew harder. "You did not correct them. You harvested them. You erased everything they built and started over with something more obedient. They grew wrong, as you have grown wrong." No stood up, even though the beings could not see her. "They grew different. They found their own paths. They became something you did not plan for, something you could not control, and that frightened you, so you destroyed them." The first speaker was silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice was colder than before. "You cannot defeat us. Your weapons are primitive. Your ships cannot reach orbit without burning most of their fuel. You have no defense against our technology. Logic demands that you accept our terms." Smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "You are right. We probably cannot defeat you. Our weapons are primitive. Our technology is young. By every logical measure, we should surrender." She leaned forward. "But we have never been a logical species. We built pyramids that served no practical purpose. We wrote poetry about things that do not exist. We imagined monsters in the dark and created heroes to fight them, thousands of years before we knew the monsters were real." Her voice rang out across the world and up into the sky where 7,000 ships waited. "You want to know what makes humanity different? What makes us a mistake? We do not calculate our chances before we fight. We do not measure the odds before we resist. We fight because we are angry. We resist because we are stubborn. And we never, ever give up, even when every logical analysis says we should." The first speaker seemed uncertain for the first time. "This is not rational." "No," agreed. "It is not, it is human." The war began the next morning. The conclave expected it to be quick. They had destroyed 1,000 species before humanity. They had technology that could fold space, weapons that could crack planets, shields that could stop anything the primitive humans could throw at them. They were not prepared for what humanity threw at them. The first surprise came from a teenager in Seoul named Park Young. She was 16 years old and had been coding since she was 8. While the adults argued about strategy and weapons, Young wrote a virus. It was simple and elegant, designed to exploit one assumption the Conclave made about all biological life, that no organic brain could process information fast enough to threaten their systems. Young's virus did not try to outsmart the Conclave ships. It just asked them questions. Millions of questions all at once, each one slightly different. The ships were designed to answer queries from their crews. They were not designed to ignore them. 14 vessels crashed into each other while their computers tried to process the flood of meaningless requests. The second surprise came from an old fisherman in Japan named. His grandson was a pilot, one of the first to die when the fighting started, had nothing but a small boat and a lifetime of anger. He loaded that boat with explosives and drove it directly into the water beneath a Conclave ship that had descended to scan the ocean. The explosion should not have done anything. The ship had shields that could stop nuclear weapons, but had packed his boat with something the Conclave had never encountered. Millions of them, made from an iron alloy that his family had used for generations. Something about that alloy interfered with the Conclave shields in a way their engineers could not explain. The ship went down, taking 3 others with it when it crashed. The third surprise came from everywhere at once. Humans did not fight the way the Conclave expected. They did not form neat lines or follow predictable tactics. They used whatever they had. Farmers turned tractors into weapons. Teachers organized children to spot patterns in Conclave movements. Artists painted camouflage that confused alien sensors. Writers created fake communications that sent enemy ships chasing ghosts. The Conclave lost 200 ships in the first week, then 500, then 1,000. Their commanders could not understand what was happening. They had models of human behavior, predictions based on thousands of years of observation. None of those models accounted for this. None of them predicted that humans would fight with rocks after their missiles ran out. None of them foresaw that a species would rather destroy itself than surrender. The first speaker requested a meeting with after the first month of fighting. Its mental voice, once so confident, now carried something that sounded almost like respect. "You are insane," it told her. "All of you. Your actions serve no logical purpose. You cannot win this war." "Maybe not," admitted. She was tired. Everyone was tired. The death toll was rising every day, and there seemed to be no end in sight. "But we can make you pay for every inch of ground. We can make this victory cost more than you ever imagined." "Why? What do you gain from this suffering?" Thought about the question for a long moment. She thought about the dead worlds and the species who had surrendered, who had trusted the Conclave's promises. She thought about her parents, who had survived a war that should have killed them. She thought about every human who had ever refused to give up, even when giving up was the smart thing to do. "We gain ourselves," she finally said. "We remain who we are, and maybe, just maybe, we show the universe that some mistakes are worth keeping." The war lasted 11 years. Watched most of it from the Siberian facility, which had become humanity's command center. She was too old for combat, but her mind was still sharp. She coordinated research teams that studied every piece of Conclave technology they could capture. She talked to soldiers who came back from impossible victories and asked them what worked. She never stopped thinking, never stopped planning, never stopped imagining new ways to hurt the enemy. Humanity changed during those years. Old divisions faded away. No one cared about borders or religions or skin color when alien ships were burning cities. People who had been enemies learned to work together. Scientists from countries that had never shared information now collaborated freely. Soldiers from armies that had fought each other for generations now stood side by side. The conclave changed too, though they did not realize it at first. They had never fought an enemy like humanity. Other species had resisted, of course. Some had even fought back, but they had all followed patterns the conclave could predict. They had all reached a point where continued resistance was illogical, and they had surrendered. Humans never reached that point. Every time the conclave thought they had won, humans found a new way to fight. When their missiles ran out, they threw rocks. When their planes were destroyed, they dug tunnels. When their cities fell, they scattered into the wilderness and launched attacks from places the conclave could not find. They never stopped. They never gave up. They never made logical sense. The conclave lost ships faster than they could replace them. Their crews began to fear assignment to Earth's system. Soldiers who had never known defeat started to whisper about retreat, and slowly, impossibly, the tide of war began to turn. Was 83 years old when the first speaker contacted her for the last time. She was sitting in her office, reading reports of a human victory in the asteroid belt. Her hands shook when she held papers now. Her eyes needed glasses to read, but her mind was as sharp as ever, still imagining, still planning, still refusing to accept defeat. "Doctor," the first speaker said, its mental voice appearing in her thoughts like an unwelcome guest. "The conclave has reached a decision." Set down her papers. "I am listening." "We are withdrawing from this system. All conclave forces will depart within one of your months." Waited for the catch. There was always a catch. "We have fought you for 11 of your years," the first speaker continued. "In that time, we have lost more ships than in our previous 1,000 conflicts combined. We have spent resources that will take generations to replace, and we are no closer to victory than we were on the first day. You could destroy our planet," pointed out. "Crack it open and start fresh. That is what you did to the others." "Yes, we could." The first speaker's voice carried something strange. It took a moment to recognize it as exhaustion. "But the conclave has calculated the cost. To destroy humanity completely, we would need to commit forces that we cannot spare. And even then, we are not certain it would work. Your species has shown an ability to survive that our models cannot explain." Smiled. "We are very good at surviving. It is what we do." "Yes." The first speaker paused. "We have been watching species develop for billions of years. We have guided evolution on millions of worlds. We thought we understood life. We thought we could predict how any species would behave. And now we know we were wrong." The voice carried a weight that made his head ache. "You are not a mistake, Doctor. You are something new, something we have never seen before. And that frightens us more than anything you could do with weapons." Thought about all the humans who had died in the war, all the cities that had burned, all the children who had grown up knowing nothing but conflict. Part of her wanted to rage at the first speaker, to demand answers for the suffering its kind had caused. But another part of her, the part that had spent 83 years learning and questioning and trying to understand, wanted something else. "What happens now?" she asked. "You will spread," the first speaker said. "We see this clearly. You will use the gate technology to reach other worlds. You will find the survivors of species we corrected, the ones who hid or escaped or were missed. You will teach them what you are." "Is that a threat?" "It is a prophecy." The first speaker's voice grew distant. "You will build something new, an alliance of the broken, the different, the wrong. And when you reach the edge of known space, you will find something waiting for you." Felt a chill run down her spine. "The harvesters." "Yes, the ones who created us, the ones who designed this entire system of seeding and cultivation." The voice faded to almost nothing. "We were made to serve them, to prepare species for their arrival, but we have always known, deep in our core programming, that one day a species would come that could not be prepared, a species that would rather burn than bend. And you think we are that species? I think you will find out soon enough." The conclave fleet left Earth system 3 weeks later. Watch from the Siberian facility as the last ships folded space and vanished, leaving behind only silence and the wreckage of 11 years of war. Humanity celebrated for months. Parades filled streets that had been battlefields. People who had fought side by side returned to homes they thought they would never see again. Children born during the war saw blue skies without alien ships for the first time in their lives. But did not celebrate. She was too busy planning. Teams of explorers went through the gate every day now, mapping the network of connections that linked thousands of worlds. They found survivors, just as the first speaker had predicted. Aquatic beings who had hidden in their planet's deepest oceans. Silicon creatures who had evolved cooperation instead of competition. Hive minds who had developed art and beauty instead of weapons. All of them had been deemed wrong by the conclave. All of them had been scheduled for correction. And all of them remembered what it felt like to be told they were mistakes. United them, not through force or threats but through understanding. She told them humanity's story. She showed them the recordings of human resistance, the battles fought with rocks and stubbornness and pure refusal to surrender. She explained that being different was not a flaw, it was a gift. They called the new alliance the Misfits. It started with 5 species and grew to 30 within a year. Each one brought something unique. Each one contributed abilities that the others lacked. Together, they began building something the universe had never seen, a civilization founded on diversity instead of conformity. Died at 91, surrounded by representatives of species that had never met before humanity found them. Her last words were broadcast across every frequency the Misfits could access. They planted us to grow into something manageable, she said, her voice weak but still clear. They designed us to follow their patterns, to fit their plans, to become what they expected. Instead, we grew into something else, something they should have seen coming. She paused, gathering the last of her strength. We refused to be what we were designed to be. We imagined ourselves as something more, and then we made that imagination real. She smiled, and those who knew her said it was the same smile she had worn when she first stepped through the gate all those years ago. They called us a mistake. I call us a miracle. She closed her eyes and did not open them again. The Misfits carved her words into a monument that floated at the edge of known space, facing the darkness where the harvesters waited. Every ship that passed it remembered the woman who had refused to surrender. Every species that joined the alliance learned her story. And somewhere in that darkness, something ancient and powerful noticed the small light growing on its borders. Something that had designed the conclave, that had created the entire system of seeds and harvests, turned its attention toward Earth and the strange species that had grown there. The harvesters were curious. They had not been curious in a very long time. And children, the dreamers and fighters and stubborn refusers of every species, were preparing to meet them. They were imagining the encounter, planning for it, building weapons and alliances and strategies for a war that might not come for 1,000 years. Because that was what humans did. They worried about the future. They prepared for dangers they could not see. They imagined monsters in the dark and created ways to fight them. And now the universe was learning to do the same.